The blade left her hand like whispered death spinning through the smoke-filled air with perfect grace. Time slowed, stretching a heartbeat into eternity. A single breath caught in 100 throats eyes wide, waiting for steel to find flesh or miss. Then came the scream. Not the kind that faded gently, but the kind that echoed forever in nightmares and empty rooms. 28 years later, the woman who'd thrown that blade sat alone on a porch beneath Montana skies, haunted by ghosts that refused to fade with time. Her fingers trembled as she poured coffee, each tiny shake an unforgiven betrayal. She knew the past had never left. It had merely bided its time, lurking at the edge of her valley sanctuary, waiting for the day it would ride in hard and fast guns drawn vengeance burning bright. That day had finally come. Because some wounds refuse to heal, some debts demand payment, and the past, when ignored, always returns riding hard on horseback and hungry for blood. The Montana wind carried promises of winter across the weathered planks of Catherine Delacroix's front porch. At 58, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to mistrust her own hands. The tremor in her fingers was barely noticeable as she poured coffee from the dented pot, but Catherine felt every microscopic shake like a betrayal. Her farmhouse sat alone in the valley, surrounded by acres of golden grass that whispered secrets to the sky. The nearest neighbor lived 12 miles east. The town of Millbrook was 23 miles south, a dusty collection of buildings that time had forgotten. Catherine preferred it that way. She settled into the rocking chair Thomas had built her 30 years ago. The wood was smooth now, worn by countless evenings spent watching the sun die behind the mountains. A photograph rested on the small table beside her. Thomas in his sharp black vest, herself in sequined emerald, both smiling beneath the bright lights of the Chicago amphitheater. Catherine, the Crimson Rose, Delacroix, and her assistant Thomas. The poster had called her the most acclaimed knife thrower in America. Standing ovations in New York, sold-out shows in San Francisco, the blade that never missed its mark. Until it did. Catherine's hand found the scar along her left wrist, a thin white line that served as her daily reminder. The night everything changed. The night Thomas. Stop, she whispered to the empty porch. But the memories came anyway, as they always did when the wind blew just right and the shadows grew long. Thomas spinning on the wooden wheel arms spread wide, trusting her completely. The crowd holding its breath, her hand drawing back, feeling the perfect weight of the blade. Then the stumble, the smell of whiskey on her breath, the terrible, impossible trajectory of steel through air, the scream. Catherine closed her eyes and felt the phantom weight of the knife in her palm. 28 years since she'd thrown her last blade. 28 years since she'd watched Thomas collapse, blood spreading across his white shirt like spilled wine. 28 years since she'd buried him in the cemetery behind the Methodist church. The coffee had gone cold in her cup. Catherine stood joints, protesting the movement, and walked inside. The farmhouse was modest but well kept. Clean pine floors, simple furniture, no mirrors. She'd removed them all years ago, unable to face the woman who had killed the only man she'd ever loved. In the kitchen, she washed the cup with methodical care. Everything had its place. Everything followed routine. Routine was safe. Routine didn't require decisions that could destroy lives. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 times. Catherine glanced toward the window above the sink. Dust clouds on the horizon moving too fast to be natural wind patterns. Riders. Catherine's stomach tightened. Visitors were rare. Welcome visitors were rarer still. She moved to the front window and counted the shapes emerging from the heat haze. 5 men on horseback riding hard toward her property. Something cold settled in Catherine's chest as she recognized the way they spread out, flanking the farmhouse like hunters surrounding prey. These weren't travelers seeking directions or help with a broken wagon wheel. Catherine retreated to the kitchen and opened the bottom drawer beside the stove. Beneath old dish towels and recipe cards, her fingers found the smooth wooden handle. She lifted out the knife, 10 inches of perfectly balanced steel that had once been her signature throwing blade. The metal felt alien in her grip, foreign, dangerous. She set it on the counter and backed away, hands shaking worse now. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Jake Morrison sat tall in his saddle, eyes fixed on the modest farmhouse ahead. At 34, he wore his scars like badges of honor. The puckered bullet wound on his left shoulder, The knife slash across his jaw, the rope burn around his neck from his one unsuccessful hanging. But the deepest scar was invisible, carved into his heart 25 years ago, by a woman who had promised to care for him and then disappeared when he needed her most. "That's the place," he told his men, voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. Billy Hayes spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Looks empty, boss. Maybe the old witch ain't home." "She's home!" Jake's certainty was absolute. He'd been tracking Catherine Delacroix for 3 years, following whispers and rumors across half the Western Territories. "Santos, take the barn. Red circle around back. Marcus will be here soon with the girl." What about me?" Billy's eyes held the particular hunger that made decent people cross the street when they saw him coming. "You come with me," Jake said. "Time to collect what's owed." They dismounted 50 yards from the house. Jake checked his Colt 45, ensuring the cylinder was full. The weight of the gun felt good in his hand, solid and final. Santos, a lean Mexican with dead eyes, jogged toward the weathered barn. Red Morgan, whose hair had earned him his nickname, disappeared behind a line of cottonwood trees. Billy Hayes adjusted his gun belt and grinned, showing teeth stained brown from years of chewing tobacco. Jake walked up the front steps, boots loud against the worn wood. He didn't bother knocking. The door wasn't locked. Country people, Jake thought with disgust. Still believing the world was safe. Inside the house smelled of lavender and old wood. Clean, quiet, respectful. Jake hated it immediately. "Catherine," he called, voice echoing through the rooms. Come out, wherever you are." No response. Billy pushed past him, heading toward the kitchen. "Maybe she's cooking dinner. I'm powerful hungry after all that riding." Jake followed more slowly, taking in the details. Family photographs on the mantelpiece. Catherine and Thomas in their performing days, all sequins and smiles. A shelf of well-read books. Embroidered pillows on the sofa. The life she'd built while he'd suffered on the streets. In the kitchen, Billy was already opening cabinets, searching for food or liquor. "Nothing but flour and beans," he complained. "What kind of woman don't keep decent provisions?" "The kind who's about to have visitors," Jake said. A shadow moved past the window. Jake's hand went to his gun but relaxed when he recognized Santos's silhouette. A moment later, Red appeared in the back doorway. "Barn's empty," Santos reported in his heavily accented English. "Some horses in the corral, tools and such. Back door was unlocked too," Red added. "Found this in the bedroom." He held up a small wooden jewelry box. Jake opened it. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay a collection of throwing knives. Each blade was perfectly maintained edges, sharp enough to split hair. The handles were worn smooth from years of use. Well, well," Jake murmured. "Looks like our Catherine hasn't forgotten her old skills." Billy snatched one of the knives from the box, testing its weight. "Pretty little things. Bet they'd feel real nice sliding between someone's ribs." "Put it back." Jake's voice carried enough authority to make Billy comply immediately. "Those are hers. She'll need them for what's coming." Red frowned. "Boss, if she's armed?" "She's an old woman," Jake interrupted. "Probably can't even hold one steady anymore." He closed the jewelry box with a soft click. "Besides, I want her to try. I want her to remember what she used to be before I show her what she's become." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through the front window, Jake watched Marcus ride up with their prize, a young woman tied across the back of his horse like a sack of grain. Lucy Hartwell was 19, blonde, and possessed of the kind of innocent beauty that made men lose their minds. She'd been walking home from her job at the general store when Marcus had taken her, following Jake's careful instructions. Perfect bait for a woman who'd once claimed to have a heart. Jake strode to the front door as Marcus dismounted. "Any trouble?" "None." Marcus was older than the others, pushing 50, with silver threading through his black hair and the bearing of a man who'd once worn a badge. "Girl tried to scream once. I explained the situation to her." Lucy hung limply, a bruise darkening her left cheek. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing pale skin marked with rope burns. "Bring her inside," Jake ordered. "Time to set the stage." "Hilnum." Marcus slung Lucy over his shoulder and carried her into the house. Jake watched with satisfaction as the girl's eyes fluttered open, taking in her surroundings with growing terror. "Please," Lucy whispered. I don't have any money. My family doesn't have. Hush now, Jake said gently. This isn't about money, darling. This is about justice. He nodded to Billy, who grabbed Lucy's arms and forced her into a chair. Red produced rope from his saddlebags and began tying her securely. Now then, Jake continued, settling into the chair across from Lucy. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to wait for Catherine to come home. When she does, she's going to have a choice to make. A very important choice. Lucy's lower lip trembled. I don't understand. Who's Catherine? The woman who owns this house, Jake explained patiently. The woman who destroyed my life 25 years ago. His voice hardened. The woman who's going to pay for every day I spend alone on the streets begging for scraps like a dog. Jake, Marcus's voice carried a warning. Rider coming in from the north. Jake moved to the window. A lone horseman approached at a leisurely pace, an older man in a black coat riding a bay gelding. Who is it? Red asked. Don't know. Jake studied the rider's posture, the confident way he sat his saddle. But he's not running. Either he doesn't know we're here, or he doesn't care. The stranger dismounted near the corral and tied his horse to the fence. Even from a distance, Jake could see the man was well past his prime. Gray hair, slight stoop to his shoulders, movements careful and deliberate. Probably just a neighbor, Billy suggested. Want me to handle him? No. Something about the man bothered Jake, though he couldn't identify what. Let him come to us. Santos, get behind the door. When he walks in, we'll have ourselves another guest. The stranger approached the house slowly, boots crunching on the gravel path. He paused at the bottom of the front steps, head tilted as if listening for something. Then he climbed the steps and knocked. 3 measured raps that echoed through the house. Catherine! The voice was deep-cultured, with just a hint of an accent Jake couldn't place. Catherine, are you home? Jake motioned for silence. On the other side of the door, the stranger waited with obvious patience. Another knock. Catherine, it's Thomas. I know you're in there. The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Thomas, the assistant from the old days. The man Catherine had supposedly killed in a performing accident. Billy's eyes widened. Red mouthed a silent curse. Jake's mind raced. According to every story he'd heard, every newspaper account he'd read, Thomas had died that night in Chicago. Catherine had fled the circuit, disappeared into the wilderness to live with her guilt. But if Thomas was alive, Catherine, the voice continued, I know what happened in town today. Marcus and his friends. I know they took the girl. Ice formed in Jake's stomach. How could this old man possibly know about Lucy? I've been watching them, Thomas said. Following them. I know they are in there with you, now listening to every word I say. Santos stepped away from the door hand, moving to his gun. Red's face had gone pale. Billy looked confused, glancing between Jake and the door, as if expecting ghosts to materialize. So here's what we're going to do. Thomas continued, voice perfectly calm. I'm going to give you boys exactly 60 seconds to mount up and ride away. Take the girl with you if you want. Catherine won't stop you. She's learned the cost of violence. Jake found his voice. You're bluffing, old man. A soft chuckle from the other side of the door. Maybe, but are you willing to bet your lives on it? Silence stretched between them, thick with tension and unspoken threats. Then Thomas spoke again, and his voice had changed. Gone was the gentle, cultured tone. In its place was something cold and sharp as winter steel. Your 60 seconds just became 30. Billy jumped up, hand on his gun. Boss, maybe we should... Shut up! Jake's mind was working furiously. Thomas was supposed to be dead. But if he wasn't, if he'd somehow survived. What other lies had he built his revenge upon? 20 seconds, Thomas announced. He's bluffing, Jake said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. 10 seconds. Red was backing toward the rear door. Santos had drawn his gun but seemed unsure what to do with it. 5. Billy's nerve broke. He lunged for the front door, fumbling with the handle. 4. The door exploded inward. But it wasn't Thomas who came through. It was Catherine Delacroix, and she moved like liquid death. The knife left her hand before Billy could even cry out. 10 inches of perfectly balanced steel flew across the room in a flawless arc, taking him in the throat just below the Adam's apple. Billy's scream became a gurgle. Blood erupted from the wounds, spraying across the clean pine floors. He clawed at his neck, staggered backward, and collapsed against the kitchen table. The room erupted into chaos. Santos fired wild, his bullet splintering the doorframe where Catherine had been a heartbeat before. But she was already moving, rolling behind the sofa as Red's gun barked twice. Jake stood frozen, watching 30 years melt away in an instant. This wasn't the trembling old woman he'd expected. This was the Crimson Rose, and she was very much alive. Catherine rose from behind the sofa, another knife already in her hand. Her eyes found Jake's across the room, and he saw recognition flicker there. "Hello, Jacob," she said quietly. The sound of his childhood name on her lips unlocked something primal in Jake's chest. 25 years of rage and abandonment crystallized into pure white-hot fury. "You remember me?" It wasn't a question. "I remember a little boy who needed help." Catherine's gaze flicked to Billy, who had stopped moving. Blood pooled beneath his body. "I remember failing him." "You did more than fail," Jake snarled. "You destroyed me." Red and Santos flanked out, trying to get clear shots, but Catherine kept the furniture between herself and their guns. She moved with surprising grace for a woman her age, each step calculated and precise. "Where's Thomas?" Jake demanded. Catherine's expression flickered. "Thomas is dead. He was just outside. We heard him. Thomas died 28 years ago." Catherine's voice carried absolute certainty. "I killed him." Marcus, who had been silent through the entire exchange, suddenly laughed. "She doesn't know." Everyone turned to stare at him. Marcus stood near the back door, Lucy still tied to the chair beside him. His weathered face wore an expression of cruel amusement. "She doesn't know about Thomas," he repeated. "All these years living with her guilt, and she doesn't know the truth." "What truth?" Catherine's voice had gone very quiet. Marcus drew his gun, not pointing it at anyone in particular, just letting its weight settle comfortably in his grip. "Thomas didn't die that night in Chicago, Catherine. He lived. Spent 2 weeks in the hospital, then 6 months recovering. Asked about you every day." Catherine's knife hand began to tremble. "That's impossible." "I was there," Marcus continued. "Fresh out of the academy, assigned to crowd control for your show. Saw the whole thing. The accident, the aftermath, the investigation." His smile was ugly. "Want to know the real tragedy? Thomas woke up asking for you, but you'd already run." "No." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Oh yes, he hired investigators. Spent every penny he had trying to find you. But Catherine Delacroix had vanished like smoke. Left behind a man who loved her more than his own life." Jake watched Catherine's face crumble, saw the knife slip from nerveless fingers. Good. Let her feel the pain he'd carried all these years. "He's dead now," Marcus added casually. "Died 3 years ago. Alone. Still asking for you." The knife clattered to the floor. That was when Red made his move, rushing forward, while Catherine stood devastated and defenseless. His gun was already rising when Catherine's training kicked in. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. Her hand found the second knife on her belt and threw it in one fluid motion. Red's charge became a stumble as 8 inches of steel buried itself in his chest. He looked down at the handle protruding from his shirt, surprised, then collapsed face first onto the floor. "Two down," Catherine said, her voice steady again despite the tears on her cheeks. Santos cursed in rapid Spanish and opened fire, forcing Catherine to dive behind the overturned table. Wood splintered around her as bullets chewed through the furniture. Jake drew his own gun mine, reeling from Marcus's revelations. Thomas had lived. The guilt that had driven Catherine into exile, the shame that had made her abandon her career and disappear into the wilderness. It had all been for nothing. The irony was beautiful. "Come out, Catherine," Jake shouted over the gunfire. "Let's finish this like adults." "Go to hell," she called back. Santos paused to reload, and Catherine made her move. She sprinted toward the kitchen where Billy's body lay in a spreading pool of blood. Jake tracked her with his gun, but didn't fire. Not yet. He wanted to see what she would do. Catherine knelt beside Billy's corpse and retrieved her first knife, wiping the blade clean on his shirt. The action was practiced professional. How many times had she done this in the old days? "You always were good with those things," Jake called. "Even as a child, watching you practice in the alley behind the theater. Do you remember that, Catherine? Do you remember the little boy who worshipped you?" Catherine's straightened knife balanced perfectly in her grip. "I remember." Then you remember how you promised to take care of me, how you said you'd find me a real home with real parents who'd love me. Your mother. My mother was a whore who sold me to whoever had $2. Jake's voice cracked with old pain. And when she finally drank herself to death, where were you? Where was the great Catherine Delacroix when I was sleeping in doorways and eating garbage? Catherine closed her eyes. I tried to find you. Liar! Your manager said you'd already been placed with a family. He said, he lied. Jake's composure finally shattered. He took the money I earned helping with your act and kept it for himself. Told me you'd said I was too much trouble, that you never wanted to see me again. Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. Oh, Jacob, I never said that. I never would have. Save it. Jake's gun steadied on her chest. 25 years too late for apologies. Sanos had finished reloading. He stepped out from behind his cover, aiming carefully. Boss, just give the word. Jake hesitated. He dreamed of this moment for so long, planned it down to the smallest detail. Catherine Delacroix on her knees, begging for mercy, finally understanding the pain she'd caused. But looking at her now, bloody, desperate, fighting like a cornered animal to protect an innocent girl, he felt something unexpected. Respect. Marcus, Jake said without taking his eyes off Catherine. What's your play here? The older man shrugged. Just along for the ride, Jake. You know that. Do I? Jake's peripheral vision caught movement near the back door. Because it seems like you know an awful lot about Catherine's past for someone who just happened to be passing through. Marcus's smile faltered slightly. What are you implying? I'm implying that maybe you've got your own reasons for being here. Jake's voice hardened. Your own history with our dear Catherine. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. You always were too smart for your own good, Jake. His gun swung toward Catherine. The shot was impossibly loud in the confined space. Catherine threw herself sideways as the bullet scorched the air where she'd been standing. She hit the floor, hard-rolled, came up with the knife already in motion. Marcus was fast for his age, but not fast enough. The blade took him high in the shoulder, spinning him around. His return shot went wide, punching a hole in the kitchen window. 28 years, Marcus gasped, pulling the knife from his shoulder. 28 years I've wanted to have this conversation. Catherine stared at him, recognition finally dawning. Marcus Garrett, Detective Marcus Garrett. Former detective, he corrected. Lost my badge because of you. Lost my pension. Lost everything. Because you were obsessed, Catherine said. Because you couldn't accept that Thomas's injury was an accident. Because I loved you, Marcus roared. Because I watched you night after night, perfect and untouchable, and dreamed of making you mine. And when you finally fell, when you were vulnerable and broken, you still wouldn't have me. Jake watched this exchange with growing unease. His carefully planned revenge was spiraling out of control, becoming something larger and more complicated than he'd intended. You came to me in the hospital, Catherine continued, pieces falling into place. Said you wanted to help. Said you'd make sure I was never charged with Thomas's death. And what did you do? Marcus's voice was raw with old pain. You ran, disappeared, left me standing there like a fool with my heart in my hands. Because you weren't offering help, Catherine said. You were offering ownership. Marcus raised his gun again, but Sanos was faster. The Mexican shot took Marcus center mass, dropping him to his knees. Sorry, Jefe, Sanos said to Jake, but this was getting too messy. Marcus toppled forward, blood spreading beneath him. His lips moved soundlessly, then went still. 3 down. Catherine looked between Jake and Santos, calculating odds. The girl Lucy was conscious, now watching the carnage with wide, terrified eyes. Just you and me left, Santos observed, checking his ammunition. Not quite, Jake said. Santos turned confused. Boss! Jake's bullet caught him between the eyes. Santos dropped without a sound, his gun clattering across the floor. Now it was just Jake and Catherine facing each other across a room full of corpses. Why? Catherine asked. Because this was always supposed to be between us, Jake replied. Because Santos would have killed you quick, and you deserve better than that. Catherine straightened, dignity intact despite the blood on her clothes. What happens to the girl? That depends on you. Name your terms. Jake smiled, and for a moment Catherine could see the lost little boy he'd once been hiding beneath the killer he'd become. Fight me, he said. Like the old days. Blade against blade. Winner takes all. Catherine glanced at her remaining knives, then at Lucy's terrified face. The girl was young, innocent, undeserving of death, just like Jacob had been 25 years ago. And if I win, you won't. Catherine picked up her knife, testing its balance one final time. The metal felt right in her hand, now familiar as her own heartbeat. If I do, Jake drew his own blade, a hunting knife with a 7-inch steel blade and a bone handle worn smooth by years of use. Then maybe, he said, we'll both find some peace. The first exchange was lightning fast. Catherine's knife whistled through the air where Jake's head had been a split second before. His return thrust missed her ribs by inches close enough that she felt the wind of its passage. They circled each other in the blood-soaked room predators, recognizing the danger in their prey. Jake was younger, stronger, driven by rage that had fermented into something pure and terrible. But Catherine had trained for decades to hit targets the size of playing cards from 30 feet away. Her movements were precise, economical, deadly. The second exchange drew blood. Catherine's blade opened a shallow cut along Jake's forearm. His return stroke caught her across the cheek, a red line that began weeping immediately. Getting slow in your old age, Jake taunted. Catherine didn't waste breath on replies. She feinted left reversed and nearly took his throat. Only a desperate backward leap saved him. They fought through the house like dancers performing a lethal ballet. In the living room, Jake's knife punched through the wall where Catherine's head had been. In the kitchen, Catherine's blade shattered a coffee cup, sending porcelain shards flying. Blood slicked the floors beneath their feet. Both were wounded now. Catherine with cuts on her arm and shoulder, Jake sporting gashes across his chest and thigh. But Catherine was tiring faster. Age was a cruel opponent, sapping her strength and slowing her reflexes. Jake pressed his advantage, driving her back toward the front door. Yield, he gasped, sweat and blood mixing on his face. Yield and I'll make it quick. Catherine's response was another perfectly aimed throw. Jake twisted aside, but not far enough. The knife buried itself in his left shoulder, pinning him against the doorframe. He looked down at the handle protruding from his body, then back at Catherine. Blood ran freely from the wound, soaking his shirt. Good throw, he admitted. Then he yanked the knife free and reversed his grip, preparing for one final assault. That was when the front door opened and Thomas walked in. He looked exactly as Catherine remembered him from 28 years ago. Tall, elegant, wearing his performance clothes. The only difference was the terrible wound in his chest, dark with old blood. Hello, Catherine, he said gently. Jake spun toward the voice confusion, replacing rage on his face. But you're dead. Thomas smiled sadly. Yes, I have been for quite some time. Catherine stared at the apparition, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Thomas, Marcus was lying, my dear. I did die that night in Chicago. Your knife found its mark just as it was meant to. I don't understand. Thomas stepped further into the room, seemingly unaware of the carnage around him. Some wounds are too deep to heal with time, Catherine. Some guilt's too heavy to bear alone. His eyes found hers across the blood-soaked space. I've been waiting for you to forgive yourself. I can't, Catherine whispered. I killed you. No. Thomas's voice was infinitely gentle. You made a mistake. There's a difference. Jake watched this exchange with growing horror. Whether hallucination or something more supernatural, the presence of Thomas was undermining everything he'd believed about Catherine's guilt. She destroyed both our lives, Jake protested. She abandoned me. She was broken. Thomas interrupted, turning his attention to the younger man. Broken and guilty and drowning in shame. People don't make good decisions when they're drowning, Jacob. The sound of his childhood name on a dead man's lips sent ice through Jake's veins. You know me. I know what you became. I know why. Thomas's expression was infinitely sad. And I know it doesn't have to end this way. Jake looked between Thomas and Catherine, his certainty crumbling. She has to pay. She has been paying, Thomas said. For 28 years she's been paying. Isn't that enough? The knife in Jake's hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The rage that had sustained him for so long was bleeding away, leaving only exhaustion and a pain so deep it had no name. "I don't know how to stop," Jake whispered. "Yes, you do," Thomas replied. "The same way she's going to learn to start again." Catherine watched Jake's face cycle through emotions, rage to confusion, to something that might have been hope. The knife fell from his nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor beside all the others. "I'm sorry," Jake said and began to cry. Catherine stepped forward and for the first time in 28 years allowed herself to touch another human being with compassion. She wrapped her arms around the broken man, who had been a lost little boy, and held him while he wept for the family he'd never had. "I'm sorry too," she whispered into his hair. "I'm so very sorry." When Jake finally pulled away, Thomas was gone. Whether he had ever truly been there or existed only in Catherine's guilt-ridden mind didn't matter. What mattered was that Catherine finally understood what forgiveness looked like. "What happens now?" Jake asked, wiping his eyes. Catherine looked around the room, at the bodies, the blood, the destroyed remnants of her quiet life. Then her gaze fell on Lucy, who had watched everything with the stunned silence of deep shock. "Now," Catherine said, "we clean up our mess, both of us." She walked to Lucy and began untying the ropes. The girl's eyes followed her movements with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Are you going to kill us?" Lucy whispered. Catherine paused in her work. The question deserved an honest answer. "I don't know," she said finally. "I don't know who I am anymore." Behind her, Jake was checking the bodies, confirming what they already knew. Billy Red, Santos Marcus, all dead. The price of violence paid in full. "There's a shovel in the barn," Catherine said without turning around. "We'll need to dig graves, deep ones." And then, Catherine finished untying Lucy and helped the girl to her feet. "Then we figure out how to live with what we've done." Jake nodded slowly. It wasn't the ending he'd planned. It wasn't the revenge he'd dreamed of, but perhaps it was the justice they all deserved. Outside, the Montana wind continued to blow, carrying the promise of winter and the possibility of redemption across the vast, unforgiving landscape. The first part of their story was over. The hardest part was yet to come. The graves took 3 hours to dig. Catherine worked beside Jake in silence, her hands blistering around the shovel handle. The Montana soil was hard-packed from the summer drought, resistant to their efforts. Each scoop felt like penance. Lucy sat on the porch steps wrapped in one of Catherine's quilts, watching them work. The girl hadn't spoken since they'd untied her. Shock, Catherine knew. She'd seen it before in the faces of audience members who witnessed her accident with Thomas. Some wounds took time to show themselves. "Deeper," Catherine said when Jake paused to wipe sweat from his face. "Coyotes." Jake nodded and resumed digging. His shoulder wound had stopped bleeding, but Catherine could see the pain in his movements. They were both hurt, both exhausted, both carrying burdens that would never fully heal. But they were alive. That had to count for something. The sun was setting by the time they finished. 4 graves in a neat row behind the barn, far enough from the house that Lucy wouldn't have to see them from the windows. Catherine had wrapped each body in clean sheets before they lowered them into the earth. Even killers deserve dignity in death. "What do we tell people?" Jake asked as they filled the last grave. "When they come looking." Catherine leaned on her shovel, considering. "Marcus was a former police detective. He'll be missed eventually. The others, drifters, criminals, the kind of men who disappear without anyone caring." She looked at Jake steadily. "Like you were supposed to be." Jake absorbed this without flinching. "So we lie. We survive." They walked back to the house together, tools in hand. Lucy watched their approach with hollow eyes. Catherine knelt beside her, studying the girl's face for signs of deeper trauma. "Lucy, can you hear me?" A small nod. "Are you hurt beyond the bruises?" Another nod, then a shake. Lucy's mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. "She's in shock," Jake observed. "Seen it before during the war." Catherine had forgotten that Jake's generation had fought. Another scar he carried, another reason for his rage. "There's a doctor in Millbrook," Catherine said. "We should know." Jake's voice was firm. "Too many questions, too much attention." He gestured toward the fresh graves. "We can't afford visitors right now." Catherine knew he was right, but the knowledge sat heavy in her stomach. Lucy needed professional care, needed someone who understood trauma better than a guilt-ridden recluse and a broken outlaw. I'll stay with her tonight, Catherine decided. Make sure she's not alone. And tomorrow. Catherine looked at the blood-stained porch, the bullet holes in her walls, the shattered windows. Her sanctuary had become a battlefield, her peaceful exile transformed into something darker. Tomorrow we start over. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. Catherine was teaching Lucy how to braid her hair. Simple tasks seemed to calm the girl's nerves when Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway. His face was grim. "Riders," he said simply. Catherine's hands stilled in Lucy's blonde locks. "How many?" "2, maybe 3 miles out, coming from the south." "Could be anyone." "Could be." Jake's tone suggested he didn't believe it. Catherine finished the braid and helped Lucy to her feet. The girl moved more easily now, spoke in whispers when pressed, but her eyes still held the glassy sheen of someone watching the world from a great distance. "Lucy, I need you to go to the root cellar," Catherine said gently. "Remember where I showed you with the preserves and the winter vegetables?" Lucy nodded. "Good girl. Take some water and the book I gave you. Stay there until we come get you no matter what you hear." "Understand." Another nod. Lucy gathered her things with mechanical precision and headed for the cellar entrance behind the kitchen. Catherine watched her go, heart aching for the vibrant young woman who'd been replaced by this fragile ghost. "She's getting better," Jake said quietly. "Is she?" Catherine wasn't sure. "Or is she just learning to hide the damage?" Jake had no answer for that. They moved to the front windows, staying back from the glass. Catherine had replaced the broken panes, but the bullet holes in the walls remained reminders of how quickly peace could shatter. The riders were closer now, close enough to make out details. 2 men on horseback approaching at a steady pace. Not running from pursuit, not charging into battle, just riding. "Recognize them?" Jake asked. Catherine squinted against the afternoon sun. One rider was tall and lean, wearing a black coat despite the heat. The other was shorter, stockier, with a badge glinting on his vest. "Sheriff Dawson," Catherine said, ice forming in her stomach. "From Millbrook." "And the other?" Catherine studied the tall man's posture, the way he held his reins. Something familiar in his movements, a grace she'd seen before. "I don't know." But she was lying, and Jake could hear it in her voice. "Catherine." "I said I don't know." The riders were within a quarter-mile now. Catherine could see Sheriff Dawson's weathered face, could make out the rifle across his saddle. The tall man beside him remained a mystery hat pulled low to shadow his features. "They're not coming for a social call," Jake observed. "No." "Want me to?" "No." Catherine's voice was sharp. "No more killing, not unless there's no other choice." Jake nodded reluctantly. "Then what?" Catherine considered their options. Run impossible with Lucy in her current state. Fight. Jake was right. These men weren't here to exchange pleasantries. Talk. Sometimes talking was just another way to die. "We find out what they want," Catherine decided, "and we try to convince them they don't want it badly enough to die for it." The riders pulled up 50 yards from the house, well within rifle range, but far enough back to retreat if things went bad. Professional positioning. "Catherine Delacroix." Sheriff Dawson's voice carried easily across the distance. "Need to speak with you." Catherine stepped onto the porch, hands visible but ready to move. Jake remained inside, positioned by the window with a clear line of sight. "Sheriff," Catherine called back, "what brings you so far from town?" Dawson dismounted but kept his horse between himself and the house. The tall man remained mounted, silent as a grave marker. "Got some questions about missing folks," Dawson replied. "Mind if we come closer?" "I mind. Questions can be asked from there." A pause. Catherine could see Dawson weighing his options, calculating risks. He was older now than when she'd last seen him, grayer, more cautious. Age teaching the wisdom that bravery and stupidity often wore the same face. "Marcus Garrett," Dawson said finally. "Former detective from Chicago. You know him." Catherine's mouth went dry. "I might have met him once. Years ago." "When?" "During my performing days." "Why?" "Because he's missing. Been gone 4 days now. His horse turned up in Millbrook yesterday, saddle empty, blood on the leather. Catherine forced her expression to remain neutral. I'm sorry to hear that. Marcus seemed like a good man. Seemed like an obsessed man, you ask me, Dawson replied. Word is he's been asking questions about you. Lot of questions, making people nervous. The tall man finally spoke, his voice carrying an accent Catherine couldn't place. He was also traveling with some unsavory companions, men with reputations. Catherine studied the stranger more carefully. Something about his voice, his posture. And you are, she asked. The man touched the brim of his hat politely. A concerned citizen. These missing men were seen heading this direction. We're simply trying to piece together their last movements. I haven't seen Marcus or anyone else, Catherine said. Been quiet out here. Peaceful. Mind if we look around? Dawson asked. Just to be thorough. I mind very much. This is private property. Could get a warrant. Could try. The standoff stretched between them, tension, thick as summer heat. Catherine could feel Jake's readiness through the walls, could sense his finger on the trigger. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and blood would flow again. There's something else, the tall man said, breaking the silence. A young woman from town has gone missing. Lucy Hartwell, pretty blonde girl, works at the general store. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. I'm sorry to hear that too. Her family's offering a reward, $100 for information leading to her safe return. That's generous. It is indeed. The stranger's voice carried a subtle threat now. The kind of money that makes people very motivated to search every farm, every hideout, every possible shelter within 50 miles. The message was clear: whether they found evidence today or not, more searchers would come. More questions, more attention. Catherine needed time to think, time to plan. Time to figure out how to protect Lucy without destroying what remained of their own lives. I'll keep an eye out, she said finally. If I see anything suspicious, I'll send word to town. Appreciate that, Dawson replied, but his tone suggested he didn't believe a word she'd said. The two men remounted and turned their horses south back toward Millbrook, but they didn't ride away immediately. Instead, they sat their saddles, studying the farmhouse and surroundings with professional thoroughness, looking for signs, counting windows, noting fields of fire, planning. Catherine remained on the porch until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did she allow herself to breathe fully. Jake emerged from the house, rifle in hand. That could have gone worse. It's not over. No, it's not. Jake scanned the horizon, alert for more riders. They'll be back, with more men. How long do we have? A day or two, maybe. Depends on how badly they want answers. Catherine nodded grimly. 2 days to decide their fate. 2 days to figure out how to disappear without leaving Lucy defenseless. 2 days to accomplish the impossible. They started planning that night. Catherine spread her few maps across the kitchen table, while Jake cleaned his weapons with methodical precision. Lucy sat in the corner, working on a sampler Catherine had given her, simple stitching to keep her hands busy and her mind focused on something concrete. North is Canada, Catherine said, tracing routes with her finger. But it's too far on foot, and we can't risk the main roads. West is the mountains, Jake added. Rough country, but plenty of places to hide. In winter, Jake looked up from his rifle. You got a better idea. Catherine studied the maps more carefully. Towns marked with small circles, rivers drawn in blue ink, mountain ranges sketched in brown. A whole world of possibilities, none of them promising. South is Mexico, she mused, but we'd have to get through Texas first. And east is civilization, law, the kind of attention we can't afford. They worked in silence for an hour, considering options and discarding them one by one. Every route led to problems. Every plan required resources they didn't have. Maybe we're thinking about this wrong, Jake said finally. How so? Maybe we shouldn't all run together. Catherine looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, maybe the person they're really looking for is me. Jake set down his cleaning rod and met her eyes. Marcus came here for you, but his friends came for money. Bank jobs, stage robberies, the kind of work that draws federal attention. So maybe if I disappear, they stop looking so hard at you and Lucy. Catherine considered this. It had a certain logic: remove the most dangerous element, reduce the threat to the innocents. But it also felt like another abandonment, another failure to protect someone who needed help. Where would you go? Does it matter? It matters to me, Jake smiled sadly. Still trying to save lost boys. Still trying to do better than I did before? They looked at each other across the table, two damaged people trying to find redemption in an unforgiving world. Catherine saw the little boy Jake had been desperate for family and love. Jake saw the woman who'd tried to help him, broken by her own mistakes. There might be another way, Catherine said slowly. I'm listening. Catherine moved to the window, studying the landscape in the moonlight. Her farm spread out below like a sleeping animal, peaceful and familiar. 28 years she'd lived here, building a life from guilt and isolation. Perhaps it was time to let it go. We don't run, she said. We fight. Jake frowned. Against the law, against search parties and federal marshals? Against the past. Catherine turned back to face him. What if we told the truth part of it anyway? What part? Marcus was obsessed with me, had been for years. He came here with those men to settle old scores. We fought back, defended ourselves. And then they left, rode off into the night. We don't know where they went. Jake considered this. The blood on Marcus's saddle proves there was a fight, doesn't prove anybody died. And Lucy. Catherine glanced toward the corner where the girl worked on her sampler. Lucy's hands had steadied over the past few days, her stitches becoming more even and precise. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. Lucy was here when it happened, saw the whole thing, can corroborate our story. If she's willing to lie for us, if she's willing to survive, Jake nodded slowly. It's risky. Everything's risky now, but it might work. It might. They spent the rest of the night refining the story-building details that would support their version of events. Marcus's obsession was documented. Sheriff Dawson had as much as admitted it. The presence of criminals was logical. A man seeking revenge would hire muscle to ensure success. The fight was believable. The retreat was possible. The disappearance was mysterious, but not impossible. By dawn, they had a story. Whether anyone would believe it remained to be seen. The test came sooner than expected. Catherine was feeding the chickens when she spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. Not 2 riders this time, at least 6, possibly more. Moving fast and purposeful, a posse. Jake, she called, dropping the feed bucket. He emerged from the barn, took one look at the approaching riders, and cursed with creative eloquency. Too soon, he said. We're not ready. We'll have to be. They had perhaps 10 minutes before the posse arrived. Catherine ran to the root cellar and found Lucy arranging preserve jars with obsessive precision. Lucy, listen carefully. Men are coming. They're going to ask questions about what happened here. Lucy looked up with those hollow eyes. Questions about the fight, about Marcus and his friends. Catherine knelt beside the girl, speaking slowly and clearly. I need you to remember what we talked about. Can you do that? Remember the story. That's right, the story we practiced. Lucy nodded mechanically. Marcus came with bad men. They hurt you. You fought back. They rode away. Perfect. And if they ask about Jake, Jake was visiting. He helped protect us. Good girl. Catherine helped Lucy to her feet and led her back to the house. Jake was waiting in the kitchen, his weapons hidden but accessible. He changed into clean clothes, bandaged his wounds, tried to look less like an outlaw and more like a helpful neighbor. The transformation was only partially successful. Positions, Catherine said. They'd rehearsed this. Catherine on the porch projecting calm authority. Jake in the parlor, visible through the front window, but not immediately threatening. Lucy in the kitchen, busy with domestic tasks that suggested normalcy. The posse rode into the yard like an invasion force. Sheriff Dawson led the group, his face grim with purpose. Behind him rode 6 men Catherine didn't recognize. Townspeople, farmers, maybe a few professional gun hands. All armed, all serious, all looking for blood. Catherine, Dawson called. Need to talk? Then talk, Catherine replied, remaining on the porch. Dawson dismounted and approached more aggressively than before. The tall stranger from yesterday was nowhere to be seen, but the other posse members spread out in a loose semicircle blocking potential escape routes. Professional. Found something interesting yesterday, Dawson said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. After we left here, Catherine's stomach clenched. Oh, tracks. Lot of them. Looks like there was quite a gathering on your property recently. I had visitors. So you did. Dawson's eyes were hard as winter stone. Care to tell us about them? Catherine took a breath, settling into the story they'd crafted. Marcus Garrett came to see me 3 days ago. Brought some unsavory companions with him. What did he want? To settle old business. From my performing days. What kind of business? Catherine let pain flicker across her face, not difficult given her memories. Marcus had feelings for me. Back in Chicago. When I left the circuit after my accident, he took it poorly. Poorly how? He blamed me for ruining his career. Said his obsession with my case had cost him his badge. Catherine's voice grew smaller, more vulnerable. He wanted me to pay for that. Dawson studied her face carefully. And his friends, muscle insurance, the kind of men who enjoy hurting people. What happened? They tried to force their way into my house, demanded money. I don't have information I couldn't give. Catherine touched her cheek where Jake's knife had left its mark. When I refused, they became violent. You fought back? I defended myself. Dawson's gaze shifted to the kitchen window where Jake was clearly visible. With help, Mr. Morrison happened to be visiting. He assisted in driving them off. Morrison. Jake appeared in the doorway, projecting calm competence. Jake Morrison, I've been helping Mrs. Delacroix with some repairs around the farm. Dawson looked between them suspiciously. Convenient timing. Lucky timing, Jake corrected. For all of us. Where are they now, Marcus and his friends? Catherine shrugged with apparent helplessness. They rode off after the fight. North, I think, but I can't be sure. It was getting dark. Just like that, they gave up and left. They were hurt, bleeding. Maybe they decided I wasn't worth dying for. Dawson absorbed this story with obvious skepticism. Mind if we look around, see these tracks for ourselves? Look all you want. The sheriff gestured to his men who dismounted and began examining the ground around the house. Catherine watched nervously as they studied hoof prints, noted scuff marks, pointed at dark stains that might have been blood. The graves were well hidden behind the barn covered with transplanted sod and scattered debris. But if the searchers were thorough enough... Sheriff! One of the posse members called from near the front steps. You need to see this. Dawson walked over to examine whatever the man had found. Catherine couldn't see what it was from her position, but she noted the sheriff's expression growing darker. Bullet holes, Dawson announced. Fresh ones. In the porch post here. I told you there was a fight. Must have been quite a fight. Dawson ran his finger along the splintered wood. High-caliber rounds. Professional work. They were professional men. Indeed. Dawson straightened and fixed Catherine with a stare that could have melted steel. Tell me about the girl. Catherine's heart stopped. Girl. Lucy Hartwell. Pretty blonde thing missing from town. Her family's beside themselves with worry. I told you yesterday. You told me you hadn't seen her. But see, that's interesting because we found something else after we left here. Catherine waited, not trusting her voice. Horse tracks, leading from the main road toward your property. Small horse light rider. About the right size for a young woman. The trap was closing. Catherine could feel it like a noose around her neck. Maybe she rode this way and then turned back, Catherine suggested weakly. Maybe, Dawson smiled without humor. Or maybe she's here right now. Before Catherine could respond, one of the searchers called out from behind the house. Sheriff found something? Catherine's blood turned to ice. The graves. They'd found the graves. But when Dawson returned from investigating, his expression was puzzled rather than triumphant. Found a camp, he reported. Recent one. Fire pit bedrolls evidence of maybe 4 or 5 men staying there for a day or two. Catherine nodded as if this confirmed her story. That would be them, Marcus and his friends. Except the camp is a quarter-mile from your house. Why wouldn't they stay closer if they were here to confront you? Quick thinking. Catherine's mind raced for plausible explanations. Maybe they were watching me first, planning their approach. Or maybe, Dawson said slowly, they were waiting for something. Or someone. The sheriff's eyes found Catherine's again, and this time she saw certainty there. Not proof, perhaps, but belief. He knew she was lying. The question was, what did he plan to do about it? "I'd like to search your house," Dawson said finally. "Do you have a warrant?" "Do I need one?" Catherine considered her options. Refuse and he'd know she was hiding something. Agree and he might find evidence they'd missed bloodstains, bullet holes, signs of the violence that had taken place. Or he might find Lucy. "Search away," Catherine said, stepping aside. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Catherine's life. She watched Dawson and his men methodically examine every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. They found the bullet holes in the kitchen wall, the blood stains she'd missed scrubbing from the floor, the replaced window glass that didn't quite match the original panes. All evidence of a fight, all supporting her story. But they didn't find Lucy. The girl remained hidden in the root cellar following Catherine's instructions with the mechanical precision that trauma had taught her. No sound, no movement, no sign of her presence. When the search was complete, Dawson gathered his men in the yard for a whispered conference. Catherine couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language well enough. Suspicion, frustration, uncertainty, no proof. Finally, Dawson approached the porch again. "We'll be going now, Mrs. Delacroix, but this isn't over." "I hope you find Marcus," Catherine replied, "and the others. I hope they're all right." "I'm sure you do." Dawson mounted his horse and gathered his reins. "One more thing. If Lucy Hartwell happens to show up here, lost, confused, looking for help, you'll send word to town immediately, won't you?" "Of course." "Good, because if any harm comes to that girl, if she disappears permanently—" Dawson's voice grew cold as winter wind. "Well, let's just say the territorial marshal takes a dim view of folks who hurt young women. Even folks with sad stories and sympathetic histories." The threat was unmistakable. Catherine nodded her understanding. The posse rode away, leaving dust and doubt in their wake. Catherine remained on the porch until they disappeared completely, then hurried to the root cellar. Lucy was exactly where Catherine had left her, sitting among the preserve jars like a displaced fairy tale princess. Her eyes tracked Catherine's movement, but showed no emotion. "They're gone," Catherine said gently. "You did perfectly." "Did I?" "Yes. You were very brave." "Imam." Lucy stood slowly, brushing dust from her skirt. "What happens now?" Catherine wished she had a good answer. The immediate threat had passed, but larger problems remained. Dawson suspected the truth would keep watching, keep investigating. More searchers would come. More questions would be asked. And eventually someone would want answers that couldn't be provided without revealing what really lay buried behind the barn. "Now we prepare," Catherine said finally. "For what?" Catherine looked into Lucy's hollow eyes and saw a reflection of her own broken past. Two women destroyed by violence, trying to find a way forward in a world that offered no easy redemption. For whatever comes next. The attack came at dawn 3 days later. Catherine woke to the sound of horses moving fast across hard ground. Too many horses, too coordinated to be anything but trouble. She rolled from her bed, bare feet hitting cold floorboards. Through the bedroom window, she could see riders surrounding the house, at least 8 men all armed, all positioned with military precision. This wasn't a search party. This was an execution squad. "Jake," Catherine hissed, padding quickly to his room. But she found his bed empty, blankets cold. He'd been gone for hours. Her heart sank. Had he abandoned them to save himself? Then she heard the first gunshot. The bullet splintered the front door, sending splinters flying across the parlor. Catherine dropped to her hands and knees, crawling toward the kitchen, where she'd hidden her remaining knives. "Catherine Delacroix," a voice boomed from outside. Not Sheriff Dawson this time. Someone younger, harder with the ring of federal authority. "This is Deputy Marshal William Hayes. You're under arrest for the murder of Marcus Garrett and 4 others. Catherine's blood went cold. Hayes. Billy Hayes had mentioned a brother in law enforcement during their brief violent encounter. Family connections explaining how the investigation had escalated so quickly. "Come out with your hands visible," Hayes continued. Bring the girl. No one else has to die today. Catherine reached the kitchen and grabbed her knife belt from beneath the sink. The familiar weight of the blade steadied her nerves, brought back muscle memory from decades of performance and violence. Lucy, she called toward the root cellar. Stay hidden. Whatever happens, stay hidden. Another gunshot, this one taking out the front window. Glass showered the parlor floor like deadly snow. Catherine peered around the kitchen door frame, assessing her situation. 8 men outside, at least 2 positioned behind the barn, others spread around the house's perimeter. Professional crossfire positions that would cut down anyone trying to escape. They'd learned from Marcus's mistakes. Movement caught her eye, a figure creeping along the fence line toward the back door. Catherine recognized the profile immediately. Santos's surviving brother Miguel, come for revenge. She'd killed his sibling. Now he wanted to return the favor. Catherine drew her first knife, feeling the steel's familiar balance. 30 years since her last performance, but the blade knew her hand like a lover's touch. Miguel reached the back door, tested the handle, found it unlocked. Big mistake. The door swung open and Miguel stepped through with his gun raised. Catherine's knife was already flying. The blade took him in the chest, punching through ribs to find his heart. Miguel's gun discharged wildly, the bullet burying itself in the ceiling. He staggered backward, looked down at the handle protruding from his shirt, then collapsed in the doorway. Miguel's down, someone shouted from outside. Move in, Hayes ordered. Catherine heard boots on the front porch, the sound of men positioning for assault. She had seconds before they breached the house. She needed an edge, the root cellar. Catherine sprinted across the kitchen and yanked open the cellar door. Lucy huddled in the darkness below, clutching her sampler like a talisman. They're coming, Catherine said urgently. I need you to do exactly what I say. Lucy nodded with that mechanical precision trauma had taught her. When I give the signal, scream, loud as you can. Make them think you're being hurt. But no questions, just scream when I tell you. Catherine slammed the cellar door and overturned the kitchen table, creating a barrier between herself and the approaching lawmen. Through the window, she could see muzzle flashes as the men outside laid down covering fire. The front door exploded inward. 2 men rushed through, professional gunfighters hired by the federal marshal to handle dangerous work. Catherine threw herself behind the overturned table as bullets chewed through wood and plaster around her. Now, Lucy, Catherine shouted. The scream that emerged from the cellar was perfect raw, terrified the sound of innocence being destroyed. It froze the gunmen for just a moment, their protective instincts warring with their mission. Catherine used that hesitation. Her second knife flew over the table's edge, taking the first gunman in the throat. He dropped his rifle and fell to his knees, hands clawing at the steel buried in his neck. The second man tried to retreat, but Catherine was already moving. She vaulted the table with surprising agility, her third knife finding his chest before he could raise his weapon. 2 down, 6 to go. But Catherine had paid a price for her aggression. A bullet from outside caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around. She hit the wall hard, blood immediately soaking her nightgown. The wound was bad, not fatal, but debilitating. Her left arm went numb, throwing off her balance and precision. She's hit, Hayes called from outside. Press the attack. More men poured through the broken doorway. Catherine retreated toward the back of the house, using furniture for cover-throwing knives when she had clear shots. But there were too many of them, and her ammunition was limited. A bullet grazed her thigh, then another clipped her ear. Blood ran down her neck mixed with sweat and fear. Catherine's movements became sluggish, her throws less accurate. She was losing. That's when Jake appeared. He came through the back door like an avenging angel, guns blazing. His Colt .45 barked twice, dropping 2 marshals who'd been flanking Catherine's position. Sorry I'm late, Jake called, ducking behind the kitchen counter. Had to even the odds first. The barn, Catherine gasped, clutching her wounded shoulder. 4 men in the barn. Not anymore. Jake's smile was grim. Took care of them an hour ago. Catherine felt a surge of hope. Maybe they could win this. Maybe they could. The rifle shot came from outside, impossibly loud. Jake spun around, a look of surprise crossing his face. A red stain spread across his chest. Jake? He looked down at the wound, then back at Catherine. Well, that's not good. Jake collapsed, his guns clattering across the floor. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and spreading fast. Catherine crawled to his side, pressing her hands against the wound, but she could feel his life leaking away between her fingers. "The girl," Jake whispered. "Protect the girl." Then his eyes went glassy, and Jake Morrison died, as he'd lived fighting for something bigger than himself. Catherine knelt beside his body, rage and grief warring in her chest. Another good man dead because of her past. Another soul she'd failed to save. "Come out, Catherine," Hayes called from the yard. "It's over. You're wounded, alone, outnumbered. Surrender now and maybe we can work something out." Catherine wiped blood from her eyes and took inventory. 2 knives left, multiple wounds that were slowing her down and clouding her thinking. No allies, no backup, no hope of escape. But Lucy was still alive, still hidden, still innocent in all this madness. That had to count for something. Catherine grabbed Jake's guns and checked their loads. 2 bullets in the 45, 3 in his backup piece. Not much, but enough for a final stand. "I've got a better idea," Catherine shouted back. "Come and take me." She retreated to the parlor, overturning furniture to create firing positions. The room was a disaster, bullet holes in every wall, blood on every surface, broken glass everywhere. Her home had become a battlefield. Her sanctuary had become a tomb. Hayes appeared in the doorway, first backed by 2 surviving marshals. All 3 had their weapons trained on Catherine's position. "Drop your guns," Hayes ordered. "Last warning." Catherine's response was to put a bullet through the window behind him. The men dove for cover as glass showered the porch. "Have it your way," Hayes snarled. The final assault was brutal and overwhelming. Catherine fought with desperate skill, her remaining knives finding targets even as bullets tore through her defenses. But mathematics was against her. 3 guns against 2 fresh men, against a wounded woman, professional killers, against someone fighting for survival rather than victory. A bullet shattered her right wrist, making it impossible to hold Jake's pistol. Another slug tore through her side, dropping her to one knee. Catherine reached for her last knife with her good hand, but Hayes was already moving. He kicked the blade away and pressed his gun barrel against her forehead. "Game over," he said. Catherine looked up at him through blood-matted hair. Hayes was younger than his dead brother, but she could see the family resemblance in his cold eyes and cruel mouth. "Billy was scum," Catherine said clearly. "He died like scum." Hayes backhanded her across the face, splitting her lip. "Billy was family." "Family doesn't excuse rape and murder. Doesn't excuse what you did either." Hayes stepped back and gestured to his surviving men. "Search the house. Find the girl. Find evidence of what happened to Marcus and the others." Catherine's heart hammered as the marshals began their search. The root cellar was well hidden, but these men were professionals. If they were thorough enough. Boots tramped through the house, overturning furniture, checking closets, examining every possible hiding place. Catherine listened to their progress with growing despair. Then she heard the creak of the cellar door opening. "Well, well," one of the marshals called. "Look what we have here." They dragged Lucy up from the cellar like a prize of war. The girl didn't resist, didn't struggle, just allowed herself to be handled with that terrible mechanical compliance trauma had taught her. "Miss Hartwell, I presume," Hayes said with mock courtesy, "your family's been worried sick." Lucy's hollow eyes found Catherine's across the room. No accusation there, no blame, just empty recognition of shared disaster. "She's been through enough," Catherine said. "Let her go." "Let her go," Hayes laughed. "She's the only witness to whatever happened here. The only one who can tell us where you buried Marcus and his friends. She doesn't know anything." "We'll see about that." Hayes nodded to one of his men, who grabbed Lucy by the arm and forced her into a chair. The girl submitted without protest, that terrible passivity that made Catherine's heart break. "Now then, Miss Hartwell," Hayes said gently, "I need you to tell me what happened here 3 days ago. Take your time. Start from the beginning." Lucy looked at Catherine, then back at Hayes. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Marcus came with bad men. They hurt Catherine. She fought back. They rode away." Hayes frowned. "That's all. That's all. You're sure you didn't see anything else? Hear anything else?" Lucy shook her head with that mechanical precision. Hayes studied her face carefully, looking for signs of deception. But Lucy's trauma-induced compliance made her a perfect witness. She told the story exactly as instructed, without embellishment or obvious lies. "Interesting," Hayes mused. Because we found some disturbing evidence outside, freshly turned earth behind the barn, the kind of earth that suggests recent digging. Catherine's blood turned to ice. Could be anything, she managed. Garden plots, animal graves. Could be, but we're going to find out for sure. Hayes gestured to his men. Dig it up, all of it. Let's see what secrets this place is hiding. The next hour was agony. Catherine sat bleeding on her parlor floor, hands bound behind her back, watching through the window as the marshals systematically excavated the area behind the barn. They found the first grave within 20 minutes. Marshal, one of the diggers called, got something. Hayes strode outside to examine their discovery. When he returned, his expression was grim with satisfaction. 4 bodies, he announced. Fresh ones, all showing signs of violent death. His eyes found Catherine's. Care to explain? Catherine said nothing. The truth was undeniable, now written in earth and bone. Billy Hayes. The marshal continued reading from a small notebook. Red Morgan, Santos Valdez, Marcus Garrett, all dead, all buried on your property. Still, Catherine remained silent. The way I see it, Hayes said, settling into a chair across from her, you killed these men in cold blood. Probably robbed them too, judging by the missing horses and equipment. Self-defense, Catherine said finally. Self-defense. Hayes laughed harshly. 4 armed men against 1 old woman. They'd have to be pretty incompetent to lose that fight. They underestimated me. Or maybe you had help. Maybe your friend Mr. Morrison wasn't just visiting. Maybe he was part of your operation. Catherine looked at Jake's body already growing cold on the kitchen floor. Jake tried to help me, that's all. Help you what kill federal officers? Marcus wasn't a federal officer anymore. He was a bitter old man settling personal scores. With federal backing, Hayes revealed, Marcus was working as a contractor for the Territorial Marshal's office. His investigation into your whereabouts was official business. The revelation hit Catherine like a physical blow. Marcus had been operating under legal authority. His death wasn't just personal revenge, it was murder of a federal agent. Surprised, Hayes smiled coldly. Thought you were just killing some drifters and criminals? Well, congratulations, Catherine. You've graduated to cop killer. The legal implications crashed over Catherine like a cold wave. No jury would believe her self-defense claim now. No judge would show mercy to someone who'd killed a federal contractor and his team. She was going to hang. What about Lucy? Catherine asked quietly. What about her? She's innocent. Whatever you think I did, she had no part in it. Hayes studied Lucy, who sat motionless in her chair like a broken doll. She's a witness to federal crimes. She'll testify at your trial. She's been through enough trauma. Look at her. Hayes did look, and Catherine saw something flicker in his expression. Not quite sympathy, but recognition of Lucy's fragile state. That's not my problem, he said finally. It should be. Why? Because you care about her. Hayes leaned forward. Tell you what, Catherine, I'll make you a deal. Catherine waited, dreading what would come next. Confess. Tell me everything that happened, how many people you've killed, where you've hidden the money and weapons. Give me a complete accounting of your crimes. And in return, I'll make sure Miss Hartwell gets proper medical attention, psychiatric care, help dealing with whatever trauma she's experienced. Catherine looked at Lucy, seeing the girl's hollow eyes and mechanical movements. Professional help might be the only thing that could bring her back from the darkness. And if I don't confess, Hayes shrugged, then she testifies at your trial, relives everything that happened here over and over for months or years, while the legal process drags on. The choice was brutal in its simplicity. Catherine's life for Lucy's sanity. I need time to think. You have 5 minutes. Hayes stood and walked to the window, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts and her pain. The wounds from the gunfight were taking their toll, blood loss, making her dizzy, infection already setting in. Even if she somehow escaped legal justice, she might not survive her injuries, but Lucy could still be saved. Catherine closed her eyes and thought about Thomas, about the accident that had started this whole cascade of violence and guilt. She'd spent 28 years punishing herself for one moment of drunken carelessness. Maybe it was time to accept that some debts could only be paid with a life. "Time's up," Hayes announced. Catherine opened her eyes and looked at Lucy one final time. The girl was watching her with those empty eyes, waiting to see what would happen next. "I'll confess," Catherine said quietly. Hayes smiled with genuine pleasure. "Smart choice. Start talking." Catherine began to speak, telling the story of Marcus's arrival, the violence that followed the desperate fight for survival that had ended with 4 men dead and buried. She left nothing out: Jake's role, her own actions, the terrible choices that had led to this moment. Hayes took notes with professional thoroughness, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. The confession took nearly an hour to complete. When Catherine finished, her voice was hoarse and her strength nearly gone. But she felt something unexpected: relief. After 28 years of carrying guilt and secrets, the truth was finally in the open. "That's quite a story," Hayes said, closing his notebook. "Murder, conspiracy, destruction of evidence. You're looking at the gallows for sure." "I know. Any last requests?" Catherine looked at Lucy again. "Take care of her, please." Hayes nodded curtly. "I'll see what I can do." He gestured to his surviving men. "Load her into the wagon. We're heading back to town." They lifted Catherine, roughly her wounds, screaming in protest. But she endured the pain without complaint, focused only on Lucy's face as they carried her toward the door. "Goodbye, Lucy," Catherine whispered. The girl's lips moved soundlessly, forming words Catherine couldn't hear, but she thought she caught the shape of them. "Thank you." The trial lasted 3 days. Catherine sat in the defendant's chair, bandaged and pale, listening to testimony that painted her as a cold-blooded killer. The prosecutor was thorough, methodical, building an overwhelming case for premeditated murder. Lucy testified on the second day, her voice barely audible as she recounted the events at the farmhouse. She stuck to the story Catherine had taught her: Marcus and his men as aggressors, Catherine and Jake as defenders. But the physical evidence told a different tale. 4 graves, 4 bodies. 4 men who'd entered the farmhouse alive and never left. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Catherine received the verdict without emotion. She'd known it was coming, had accepted her fate weeks ago in the blood-soaked parlor of her former home. The judge sentenced her to hang by the neck until dead execution, scheduled for the following Friday. Catherine had 6 days to make peace with her past. They came to her cell on Thursday night. Catherine was dozing fitfully on her narrow cot when she heard the jailhouse door open. Footsteps in the corridor, hushed voices, the jingle of keys. Visitors weren't allowed after sunset. This could only mean one thing: someone had come to ensure she didn't live to see morning. Catherine sat up, preparing for whatever was coming. She'd made her peace with death, but she wouldn't go quietly if they meant to cheat the hangman. The footsteps stopped outside her cell. Keys rattled in the lock. The door swung open, revealing a figure Catherine recognized but hadn't expected to see again. Thomas. He looked exactly as he had in life, tall, elegant, wearing his performance clothes. No wounds this time, no blood on his shirt. Just the man she'd loved and lost and mourned for 28 years. "Hello, Catherine. You're not real." Thomas smiled sadly. "Does it matter?" Catherine considered this. Real or hallucination, his presence brought her a comfort she hadn't felt since the night everything went wrong. "I suppose not." Thomas entered the cell and sat beside her on the narrow cot. His weight seemed real enough, his warmth familiar and welcome. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, "for what getting myself hanged. For protecting Lucy, for choosing her life over yours." Catherine leaned against him, feeling solid flesh, despite her certainty that he was dead. "I failed her too. Look what she became. She's alive. That's what matters." "Is it enough?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, stroking her hair with gentle fingers. "It has to be." They sat together in the darkness, 2 ghosts saying goodbye. Catherine felt her fear ebbing away, replaced by something that might have been peace. "Will you be there tomorrow?" she asked. "Would you like me to be?" Catherine nodded against his shoulder. "I don't want to die alone." "You won't," Thomas promised. "I'll be right there with you." When Catherine woke in the morning, she was alone in her cell, but the comfort remained warm and steady in her chest. She was ready. They built the gallows in the town square, a temporary structure of pine boards and rope. Half the county turned out to watch Catherine Delacroix pay for her crimes. Catherine walked to the scaffold with dignity intact, her head held high despite the chains on her wrists. She wore a simple black dress the ladies' auxiliary had provided, her gray hair pinned back severely. The crowd was mostly silent, watching with the morbid fascination that public executions always drew. But Catherine noticed a small group standing apart from the others, a woman in a blue dress, flanked by two men in suits. Lucy. The girl looked better than when Catherine had last seen her. Color in her cheeks, life in her eyes, the beginnings of healing visible in her posture. The men beside her were doctors, Catherine realized, specialists brought in to help her recover. Hayes had kept his word. Catherine climbed the scaffold steps, slowly savoring her last moments under the Montana sky. The mountains were beautiful in the morning light, snow-capped peaks stretching toward heaven. The executioner was a professional, efficient, respectful, without unnecessary cruelty. He positioned Catherine over the trap door, adjusted the noose around her neck, checked the mechanism one final time. "Any last words?" the sheriff asked. Catherine looked out over the crowd, her gaze finding Lucy's face among the sea of strangers. The girl was watching intently, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," Catherine said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "For all of it, for the pain and the violence and the waste." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I'm not sorry for fighting back. I'm not sorry for protecting the innocent." The sheriff nodded and stepped back. The executioner's hand moved to the lever. Catherine closed her eyes and thought of Thomas, of Jake, of all the people who died because of choices she'd made. Then she thought of Lucy alive and healing, and decided the price had been worth paying. The trapdoor opened. Catherine fell into darkness. Epilogue. 20 years later, Lucy Hartwell Morrison stood at the edge of the cemetery, flowers in her hand, reading the simple headstone for the 100th time. Catherine Delacroix, 1837 to 1895. She fought back. The inscription had been Lucy's idea over the objections of town officials who'd wanted something more conventional. But Lucy had insisted, and her husband's influence as a federal judge had ensured her wishes were respected. "Tell me the story again, Mama." Lucy looked down at her daughter, 8 years old, with blonde curls and curious eyes that held no shadows of trauma. "Which story, sweetheart?" "About the lady who saved you." Lucy knelt and placed the flowers at the base of Catherine's grave. White roses, the same flowers Catherine had grown in her garden at the farmhouse. "Once upon a time," Lucy began, "there was a woman who made terrible mistakes. But when it mattered most, when innocent people needed protecting, she found the courage to do what was right, even though it cost her everything, especially because it cost her everything." Lucy stood and took her daughter's hand. Together they walked back toward town, leaving Catherine to her rest. Behind them, the Montana wind whispered through the grass, carrying stories of violence and redemption across the vast, unforgiving landscape. Some debts, it seemed to say, could only be paid with a life. But some lives once given could save others for generations to come. Catherine Delacroix had learned that lesson too late to save herself, but just in time to save everyone else.